Welcome! Today, we're diving into the most bizarre and outrageous business ideas ever conceived.
So today, we're going to break down two of the most spectacular failures in modern business history. One of them is a piece of kitchen hardware that basically became a Silicon Valley punchline, and it torched over $100 million of investor cash. The other? Well, it's a corporate philosophy that has dominated capitalism for about 50 years, and it's led to mass layoffs, huge corporate scandals, and even environmental disasters. Now I know, they seem like they're from completely different worlds, but you're about to see how they were born from the exact same fatal flaw.
All right, let's just jump right in with a question that on the surface sounds kind of ridiculous. What's fundamentally the dumber idea? Is it a $120 million Wi-Fi connected machine, a machine with the pressing force of 2 Teslas, by the way, that was designed to squeeze a bag of juice that you could just squeeze with your own 2 hands? Or is it the core philosophy that has guided CEOs for decades, which its own greatest champion eventually called the dumbest idea in the world? The answer, believe it or not, connects the corporate boardroom to your kitchen counter in a way you probably don't expect.
So we're going to unpack these two infamous ideas. First up, we're going to do a deep dive into the corporate theory that literally reshaped the entire world economy. And then we'll get into the juicer that squeezed absolutely nothing but investor cash. And by the time we're done here, you're going to understand the shared hidden logic that pretty much guarantees failure, whether you're running a giant multinational corporation or, frankly, just trying to navigate your own life.
Okay, so let's just lay them out side by side. On one side, you've got Juicero. The pitch was incredible, right? It was a revolutionary, tech-enabled ecosystem for perfect farm-to-glass nutrition with a subscription service and data-driven health insights. The reality? It was an over-engineered, crazy expensive gadget that did something your hands could do for free. Then on the other side, you have the theory of shareholder value. The pitch for this sounds, well, it sounds obvious, doesn't it? A CEO's job is to maximize returns for the company's owners, the shareholders. The reality? Even Jack Welch, the guy who built his legendary career and a massive fortune on this very idea, eventually had to admit it was a terrible strategy.
Let's start with the big one, the macro idea that affects millions and millions of lives, the theory of shareholder primacy. And look, this isn't just some dry business school theory. This is like the invisible software that's been running in the background of Western capitalism for half a century. It's the reason your job might feel a little less secure, why customer service seems to get worse and worse, and why companies so often seem to care way more about next quarter's stock price than their own long-term health and stability.
So how did this idea even become so dominant? It didn't just pop up overnight. You can trace a really key moment way back to 1916. So you've got Henry Ford, right? He's wildly successful. He decides he wants to stop paying special dividends to his shareholders. Instead, he wants to reinvest all that money to build more factories, hire more people, and actually lower the price of his cars for everyone. But the minority shareholders, the Dodge brothers, who wanted that cash to fund their own rival car company, they sued him. Their argument was that Ford's main job was to make profit for them, not to go on some philanthropic mission. And they won. The court basically ruled that a company is run for the profit of its shareholders. Now, fast forward to the 60s and 70s. CEOs were still mostly focused on the long-term health of their companies. Sure, they got paid about 20 times what the average worker did, but their identity was tied to building a stable institution. Then, the 80s hit, and so did Jack Welch at GE. His nickname was Neutron Jack. He brought in this ruthless obsession with boosting the stock price, firing tens of thousands of people, and using this brutal rank-and-yank system to get rid of the bottom 10% of his managers every single year. Wall Street absolutely loved it. This culture then just went into hyperdrive in the 90s when tying a CEO's pay directly to stock options became the norm. All of a sudden, their personal fortunes were tied to the daily whims of the stock market, and CEO pay just exploded to over 380 times that of their employees. The short-term stock price became the only thing that mattered.
And this obsession with short-term stock gains led to a strategy that's best described as picking up pennies in front of a steamroller. I mean, just picture that for a second. You are so focused on grabbing those tiny immediate profits, the little pennies right in front of you, that you are completely ignoring the massive company-crushing risk, the steamroller that is bearing down on you. So how do you actually do this in a real company? Well, it's tragically simple. You just slash the budgets for all the things that protect you in the long run, but don't show up in next quarter's earnings report. You cut R&D. You gut customer service, you put off critical maintenance, you skimp on employee training, and you weaken your risk management and safety departments. You are literally selling your company's future for a tiny bump in today's stock price. And this is where you see the catastrophic results. When Silicon Valley Bank collapsed in 2023, it was because they were chasing short-term profits while totally ignoring basic interest rate risk. That was a steamroller in plain sight. Regulators later called their risk management terrible. The tragic Boeing 737 MAX crashes, those are directly linked to a corporate culture that cut safety controls and rushed engineering just to compete with Airbus, a decision that put stock performance ahead of human lives. Lehman Brothers got so addicted to the huge revenues from subprime mortgages, loans to people who couldn't afford them, that they ignored the massive risk that eventually blew up the entire global economy. And the final irony? Even GE, the poster child for this whole strategy, saw its stock price fall 70% from its peak after Welch left. The company was hollowed out. Its future had been sold off for Welch's short-term gains. In every single one of these cases, the very shareholders this whole philosophy was supposed to serve ended up losing billions.
And this is the real kicker. In 2009, sitting in an interview with the Financial Times, right in the middle of the wreckage of the global financial crisis, Jack Welch himself, the guy who made an estimated $417 million championing this idea, he admitted it was stupid. He said, on the face of it, shareholder value is the dumbest idea in the world. He went on to say that shareholder value is a result of running a great company, not the strategy for creating one. You can't just make the stock price your goal. You have to focus on making great products, delighting your customers, developing your employees, and then the stock price takes care of itself. It was a jaw-dropping reversal. But by the time he said it, the damage was already done. The dumbest idea he'd pushed so hard had become the unquestioned rulebook for a whole generation of executives. All right, so let's switch gears. Let's see how this exact same flawed logic plays out on a much smaller scale. We're going to zoom all the way in from this giant economy-wrecking philosophy to a kitchen gadget that became a total punchline. This is Juicero, a perfect little condensed example of the exact same kind of warped thinking. I mean, you got to understand, the pitch was absolutely intoxicating, especially if you were in the Silicon Valley bubble. With $120 million from big-name investors like Google Ventures, the founder, Doug Evans, wasn't just selling a juicer. Oh no, he was selling a vision, an ecosystem, a platform. Think Nespresso, but for cold-pressed green juice. It was all about QR codes scanning proprietary packets to guarantee freshness, a subscription model for that sweet recurring revenue, and a seamless data-driven user experience. It sounded like the future of health, wrapped up in all the right tech unicorn language. And then, reality hit. Hard. It came in the form of a now famous 2-minute Bloomberg video that just went viral. After all the talk about ecosystems and platforms and paradigms, it turned out that this revolutionary machine did exactly one thing. It squeezed a pre-filled bag of fruit and vegetable pulp. A bag that, as reporters very quickly figured out, you could just squeeze with your bare hands and get pretty much the same amount of juice. In fact, squeezing it by hand was often faster than using the multi-million-dollar machine. The public reaction was instant, and it was brutal. Juicero became an overnight symbol of Silicon Valley's complete detachment from reality.
And the machine itself? It was this bizarre engineering marvel, but in the worst possible way. It had over 400 custom-designed parts, including a super complex gear train, a computer processor, a scanner, and a Wi-Fi antenna. Why did a juicer need Wi-Fi? Seriously? Well, it needed to connect to the internet to scan the QR code on the juice pack, just to make absolutely sure you couldn't possibly squeeze a pack that was one day past its expiration date. All of that technology, all of that venture capital, all of that complexity and cost went into a $400 machine to do a job that requires zero technology and costs nothing.
Okay, so this is the moment where these two stories, shareholder value and Juicero, just slam right into each other. Because both the doctrine of shareholder value and the Juicero press fell victim to the exact same fundamental human bias, the allure of complexity. We just have this deep-seated tendency to believe that a complicated solution must be smarter, more rigorous, and ultimately better than a simple one.
So let's give this a name. Let's call it the complexity trap. It's this cognitive bias where we mistake something that's complex for something that's sophisticated and valuable. We build these elaborate financial models, these intricate corporate strategies, and these over-engineered machines because the complexity itself feels impressive, right? It makes us feel smart, like we're in control. It can also act as a kind of smokescreen, stopping people from asking simple, common-sense questions. But what it's often doing is just masking the fact that we're solving the wrong problem, or even worse, solving a problem that doesn't even exist.
Just look at this. They're practically mirror images of the same bad idea.
The shareholder value theory, it's a complex intellectual framework, right? There are entire fields of finance and economics built around it. But ultimately, it just provides a really sophisticated-sounding excuse for simple, short-sighted greed. Its complexity distracts from the basic question. Hey, shouldn't a company also serve its customers and employees? The symptom is cutting the stuff that actually matters. Juicero. It's a complex piece of hardware, a mechanical engineering marvel, built to justify a high price for a task that was already solved. Its complexity distracted from the basic question. Why can't I just squeeze the bag? The symptom was a solution looking for a problem. See? Both created these elaborate, expensive systems to achieve a goal that could have been reached way more simply and effectively.
Now, this whole thing isn't just some fun story about a failed company or a flawed economic theory. This is where we turn the camera around. Because if you're really honest with yourself, we all fall into the complexity trap. We all have a Juicero somewhere in our lives, an area where we've picked a complicated, impressive-sounding path when a simple, direct one would have worked just fine.
So I want you to really ask yourself this. At work, are you building some elaborate project with a dozen new software tools and endless meetings when a simple, direct conversation would probably solve the whole thing? In your personal finances, are you spending hours trying to come up with some complex day trading strategy to beat the market by 0.5% when a simple, low-cost index fund would almost certainly do better for you in the long run? With your health, are you buying expensive supplements and following some ridiculously convoluted diet plan when the simple advice to eat real food and move your body is all you really need? We love complexity because it feels like we're doing more, like we're being smarter. But a lot of the time, we're just building our own expensive juice press.
So what's the big takeaway here? How do you actually avoid your own Juicero? First thing, always question the premise, not just the solution. Juicero's investors got obsessed with how cool the engineering was. They never stopped to ask if anyone actually had a problem squeezing a bag of juice. Second, you have to actively fight that urge to mistake complexity for value. A simple system that works is always, always better than a complicated one that's broken. And remember this rule of thumb. The best financial plan, the best business strategy, the best solution to almost any problem is usually the one you can explain clearly to a 10-year-old. Because in a world that is constantly trying to sell us on complex ecosystems and platforms, simplicity isn't a bug. It's the ultimate, most valuable feature.
So I'm going to leave you with one last question to chew on. Take a real, honest look at your work, your finances, your personal goals. What is the one idea that you think is brilliant and sophisticated and complex, but if you really stepped back and looked at it with fresh eyes, might just be a $400 machine to squeeze a bag? Identifying your own Juicero is the first and most powerful step to avoiding it.